Supreme Court Decision, United States v. Miller, 23-824, March 26, 2025. Case background. This case involves the question of how far the Bankruptcy Code waives the federal government's sovereign immunity under Section 106A, specifically in connection with a bankruptcy trustee's power under Section 544B to avoid fraudulent transfers of assets. A Utah-based business, All Resort Group, failed after two shareholders used $145,000 of company funds to pay their personal federal tax debts. Later, when the company filed for bankruptcy, the bankruptcy trustee, Miller, sought to avoid those funds from the U.S. government, invoking Utah's fraudulent transfer law under Section 544B of the Bankruptcy Code. This provision allows a trustee to avoid any transfer of assets that an actual creditor could invalidate under applicable non-bankruptcy law, here, Utah state law. Typically, such actions against the federal government would be barred by sovereign immunity. However, Section 106A of the Bankruptcy Code explicitly waives sovereign immunity with respect to certain code provisions, including Section 544. The key dispute here is whether this sovereign immunity waiver applies only to the federal cause of action under Section 544B itself, or also extends to the underlying state law claims that provide the elements for the Section 544B claim. Supreme Court Decision. The Supreme Court, Justice Jackson, writing for an 8-1 majority, Justice Gorsuch dissenting, ruled that Section 106A's waiver of sovereign immunity applies only to the federal claim created by Section 544B, not to the underlying state law claims invoked as the source of applicable law. The court explained its reasoning as follows. Nature of sovereign immunity waivers, Section 106A. Sovereign immunity waivers are jurisdictional. They allow courts to hear claims against the federal government, but do not themselves create new substantive rights or alter existing substantive laws. Section 106A explicitly states it does not create any new substantive claim or cause of action, underscoring it only provides jurisdiction to hear claims already existing elsewhere. Textual and structural analysis, Section 106. EI expressly abrogates immunity only with respect to specific bankruptcy code sections, including Section 544. The court found this language jurisdictional rather than substantive. Section 544B explicitly requires the trustee to identify an actual creditor who could void the transfer outside bankruptcy. This actual creditor requirement is a critical limit on trustees' powers, meaning trustees only have the same rights as actual creditors would have under state law. In contrast, Section 544A expressly allows avoidance actions without the actual creditor requirement, highlighting Congress's deliberate choice to limit subsection B. Thus, interpreting Section 106A broadly to waive sovereign immunity as to underlying state law claims would improperly modify these substantive limitations, something Section 106A explicitly forbids. Legislative history and context. The legislative history confirms Congress intended Section 106A as a limited waiver designed only to match the liability available outside of bankruptcy, not to expand liability further. The 1994 amendments to Section 106A aimed solely to clarify that immunity waivers included monetary claims, not to alter the trustee's substantive powers or remove existing state law limitations. Application of sovereign immunity precedent. Supreme Court precedent requires interpreting sovereign immunity waivers narrowly. Any ambiguity must be resolved in the government's favor. Thus, absent explicit statutory language showing a waiver with respect to underlying state law claims, the narrower interpretation prevailed. Rejection of respondents' arguments. The respondent argued broadly that the phrase, with respect to, Section 106A, showed intent to abrogate immunity for all elements, including state law claims. The court rejected this argument, stating context matters greatly, and in this context, it does not support a broad interpretation. The court also rejected the argument that a narrow interpretation renders Section 106A's waiver meaningless. It pointed out that the waiver remains meaningful in other contexts, e.g., Section 544, claims or actions against state governments. Other points. The court declined to decide alternative arguments presented by Miller, the trustee, because they were not raised in the lower courts or adequately briefed. These arguments were remanded to lower courts for initial consideration. Conclusion of the court. The Supreme Court reversed the 10th Circuit's decision, holding clearly that Section 106A abrogates sovereign immunity solely for the federal cause of action, Section 544B, not for state law claims nested within it. Vote breakdown. Majority. Justice Jackson delivered the opinion, joined by Chief Justice Roberts and Justices Thomas, Alito, Sotomayor, Kagan, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. Dissent. Justice Gorsuch dissented. Subscribe for more.